There is a particular kind of evil that does not arrive with noise. It does not break down doors. It does not raise its voice or brandish weapons in the open. No. The most dangerous kind of evil arrives with a smile. It sits beside you at the dinner table. It passes you the salt. It pours your wine. It asks about the baby growing inside you. And then, with steady hands and centuries of entitlement behind its eyes, it slips something into your glass that was never meant to be tasted. This is the story of Naomi Carter Ashford, a woman who spent 11 years in the most classified division of the Central Intelligence Agency, training her palate to detect what no ordinary person could. A woman who could identify 237 toxic compounds by taste, smell, or molecular behavior. A woman who had neutralized chemical threats in 9 countries across 4 continents before she ever set foot in a billionaire's dining room. And this is also the story of Richard Ashford the Second, a patriarch who believed his bloodline was sacred, his money was armor, and his secrets would stay buried forever. He was wrong about all 3. But before we unravel how Naomi dismantled a dynasty from the inside out, we need to start where all stories like this begin. Not with the poison, not with the Christmas dinner, but with the moment 2 worlds collided, and a powerful old man decided that one of those worlds had to be erased. Naomi Carter did not grow up soft. She was raised in a 3-bedroom house in Southeast Washington, D.C., by a mother who worked double shifts as a registered nurse at Howard University Hospital, and a father who taught chemistry at a public high school in Anacostia. Her childhood smelled like textbook pages and antiseptic. Her weekends were spent not at malls or movie theaters, but at her father's kitchen table, where he turned their small dining room into a makeshift laboratory. By the age of 14, Naomi could balance chemical equations faster than most college freshmen. By 17, she had been accepted into a pre-med track at Georgetown University on a full academic scholarship. But it was during her junior year, during a guest lecture on biochemical warfare hosted by a visiting professor with no verifiable academic history, that her life changed permanently. The professor, who introduced himself only as Dr. Allen, gave a 90-minute lecture on the history of state-sponsored poisoning programs. He spoke about thallium and polonium and ricin. He explained how certain compounds could be masked in food, absorbed through skin, or delivered through aerosol in quantities so small they would never appear in a standard toxicology screen. It was terrifying. It was fascinating. And at the end of the lecture, while every other student filed out, Naomi stayed behind. She asked Dr. Allen a single question. If these compounds are undetectable by standard screens, how do you identify them before they kill someone? Dr. Allen studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "That is exactly the right question." 6 weeks later, Naomi was contacted by a recruiter from the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. She was told almost nothing about the role, except that it involved chemistry, national security, and a willingness to disappear from normal life for extended periods of time. She said yes before the recruiter finished the sentence. Now, here is something most people do not understand about toxicology. And this is important, so pay attention. When we think of poison, we think of something dramatic. A vial of green liquid, a skull and crossbones on a bottle. But in the real world of chemical warfare and targeted assassination, the most effective poisons are the ones that mimic the body's own processes. Thallium, for example, behaves almost identically to potassium in the human body. It is absorbed through the gut, distributed through the bloodstream, and deposited into tissues, especially hair follicles and nerve endings. The victim does not feel poisoned. They feel tired. They feel nauseous. Their hair begins to fall out. By the time anyone suspects foul play, the damage is often irreversible. This is what Naomi trained to detect. Not the obvious poisons, but the invisible ones. The ones designed to look like natural illness. The ones that kill slowly, quietly, and with plausible deniability. For 11 years, she was one of the best in the world at it. She worked in embassy kitchens in Eastern Europe, testing food before it reached the plates of American diplomats. She was deployed to Southeast Asia during a string of suspicious deaths among intelligence assets. She once identified a contaminated water supply in a safe house in Beirut, 47 minutes before it would have killed 3 operatives. Her record was flawless. Her identity was classified, And when she finally left the agency at 34, not because she had failed, but because she had started wanting something the agency could never give her, she walked away quietly, with a pension, a non-disclosure agreement, and a skill set that would follow her for the rest of her life. She moved to New York. She took a position as a private toxicology consultant for a pharmaceutical firm. She bought a small apartment in Brooklyn. She started seeing a therapist to help with the transition out of intelligence work. And for the first time in over a decade, Naomi Carter tried to live like a normal person. She almost succeeded. If you are enjoying this story, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next is the moment everything changes. And trust me, you do not want to miss how this unfolds. Ethan Ashford did not look like a billionaire. That was the first thing Naomi noticed about him. Not at a gala, not at a charity fundraiser, not at any of the places where people with his net worth typically displayed themselves. She met him at a dog park in Prospect Park on a Sunday morning in March. He was wearing a faded Princeton sweatshirt, mud-stained sneakers, and throwing a tennis ball for a golden retriever named Captain, who had absolutely no interest in retrieving anything. Naomi had been sitting on a bench, reading a journal article on organophosphate degradation pathways, when Captain, ignoring the tennis ball entirely, trotted over and deposited a very soggy stick on her open journal. Ethan jogged over, apologizing. Naomi looked up, and the thing she would remember most, years later, was not that he was handsome, though he was, but that his apology was genuine, not performed, not polished. He was embarrassed. Actually embarrassed. In her experience, men with power rarely were. They talked for 40 minutes. He told her he ran a clean energy investment fund. She told him she was a consultant. Neither of them mentioned the full truth. He did not mention that his fund managed over $12 billion in assets. She did not mention that her previous career involved identifying assassination-grade toxins for the United States government. They exchanged numbers. He texted her that evening. She waited exactly 2 hours to respond. Not because she was playing games, but because old habits from intelligence work die hard. Their courtship was slow, deliberately slow. Naomi had spent over a decade reading people for a living, assessing micro-expressions, detecting deception, analyzing behavioral patterns. She applied every one of those skills to Ethan Ashford, and what she found surprised her. He was kind. Not performatively kind, but structurally kind. The kind of kindness that showed up in how he treated waitstaff, in how he talked about his late mother, in how he listened without already preparing his response. He was also, she learned gradually, the sole heir to the Ashford family fortune, a sprawling empire built on defense contracting, commercial real estate, and pharmaceutical manufacturing. His father, Richard Ashford II, had built the empire from a mid-sized contracting firm into a multi-billion-dollar dynasty over 4 decades. Ethan rarely talked about his father. When he did, his jaw tightened and his sentences became shorter. Naomi noticed. She always noticed, but she did not push. Not yet. They dated for 14 months before Ethan proposed. He did it in their apartment, the one they had been sharing for 6 months by then, on a Tuesday night, with no ring, no fanfare, and Captain asleep on the couch between them. "I don't have the ring yet," he said, "but I have the question, and I didn't want to wait for a piece of jewelry to ask it." Naomi said yes, and that was the last uncomplicated moment of their lives. Richard Ashford the Second was 71 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, and had the kind of presence that made rooms rearrange themselves around him. He spoke softly, not out of gentleness, but because he had learned decades ago that people lean in when you lower your voice, and leaning in is the first posture of submission. He had been married once, to Ethan's mother, Catherine, who died of pancreatic cancer when Ethan was 19. After Catherine's death, Richard never remarried. He told people it was because no one could replace her. The truth, which only a handful of people knew, was that Catherine had been planning to leave him when she was diagnosed. She had hired a divorce attorney. She had documented years of financial manipulation, emotional abuse, and controlling behavior. The cancer killed her before the paperwork was filed, and Richard, ever the strategist, made sure the attorney's records disappeared within a week of the funeral. This is something worth understanding about narcissistic family systems, and it applies far beyond this story. In families controlled by a narcissistic patriarch or matriarch, the structure is not built on love. It is built on dependency. Every relationship, every financial arrangement, every family tradition is designed to keep the controlling figure at the center. When someone enters the system from the outside, a spouse, a partner, a new family member, they are immediately assessed, not as a person, but as a variable. Are they controllable? Are they a threat? Will they disrupt the architecture of dependency that keeps the patriarch in power? Richard assessed Naomi the moment he learned her name, and he did not like what he found. She was not from money. She was not from a family he could leverage. She was educated, dangerously so. She was composed in a way that suggested she could not be intimidated. And she was black, which, for Richard Ashford, was not an incidental detail. It was a foundational objection. Richard had never expressed his racism in crude terms. He was far too sophisticated for that. He did not use slurs. He did not make speeches. Instead, his prejudice operated the way most institutional racism does, through systems, through gatekeeping, through 1,000 small decisions designed to exclude without ever producing a single quotable sentence. When Ethan brought Naomi to the family estate in Greenwich, Connecticut for the first time, a sprawling 18-acre property with a main house, guest quarters, and a private lake, Richard greeted her with perfect manners. He shook her hand. He complimented her dress. He asked about her work. And then, over the next 3 hours, he conducted what Naomi would later recognize as a soft interrogation, not aggressive, never aggressive, but relentless in its precision. Where did she grow up? Where did her parents go to school? What was her financial situation before meeting Ethan? Had she ever been married? Did she have any debts? What was her relationship with her family? Naomi answered every question with measured calm. She recognized the technique. She had used variations of it herself in agency debriefings. The goal was not to gather information. It was to establish dominance, to make the subject feel evaluated, to remind them that access to this world was not a right, but a privilege granted by the person asking the questions. After dinner, when Naomi and Ethan were driving back to the city, Ethan asked, "So, what did you think?" Naomi was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Your father is a very careful man." Ethan nodded. "He's always been like that." "No," Naomi said. "I mean, he's careful the way people are careful when they have something to protect, not something to share, something to protect." Ethan did not respond, but his hands tightened on the steering wheel. Now, pay close attention, because this is where the real architecture of this story begins to reveal itself. 6 months before the Christmas dinner, Naomi was organizing files in Ethan's home office. They had moved into a brownstone in Park Slope by then, when she found a locked drawer in his father's old desk. Ethan had inherited the desk years ago when Richard redecorated the Greenwich estate. It was a massive mahogany piece, probably worth more than the car Naomi drove in college. The drawer was locked with a small brass key. Naomi could have picked it in under 30 seconds, another skill from her previous life. But she did not. Instead, she asked Ethan about it. "I've never been able to open it," he said. "Dad said the key was lost years ago." Naomi looked at the drawer. She looked at the keyhole. And something in the back of her mind, the part that had been trained to notice inconsistencies, whispered that a man like Richard Ashford did not lose keys. She let it go, for the moment. But 3 weeks later, when she and Ethan visited the Greenwich estate for a weekend brunch, Naomi excused herself to use the restroom, and instead spent 4 minutes in Richard's private study. She found a small brass key in a compartment behind the bottom drawer of his current desk. It was not hidden well enough to stop someone who knew how to look, but it was hidden well enough to stop someone who was not looking. She did not open the drawer that day. She took the key, and she waited. When she finally opened the drawer, alone, on a Wednesday afternoon, she found a leather portfolio containing 3 documents. The first was a letter from Catherine Ashford's divorce attorney, dated 4 months before her death, outlining the terms Catherine had requested, including full custody of Ethan, liquidation of her share of the Ashford estate, and a detailed accounting of financial assets she believed Richard had hidden in offshore accounts. The second was a medical report, not from Catherine's oncologist, but from a private physician whose name Naomi did not recognize. The report detailed a series of appointments spanning 8 months, during which Catherine had complained of persistent fatigue, nausea, hair loss, and peripheral neuropathy. The physician's notes indicated possible environmental toxin exposure, but no further investigation was conducted. The report was dated 2 years before Catherine's cancer diagnosis. The third document was a receipt from a chemical supply company in Delaware, dated during that same 8-month window. The receipt was for a compound called dimethylmercury. Naomi's blood went cold. Here is what you need to understand about dimethylmercury. And this is not dramatized. This is documented medical science. Dimethylmercury is one of the most dangerous organic mercury compounds in existence. It is so toxic that a single drop, even through a latex glove, can be lethal. It was responsible for the death of a Dartmouth College chemistry professor in 1997, who spilled a microscopic amount on her gloved hand during a laboratory procedure. She developed mercury poisoning symptoms months later and died within a year. The symptoms of chronic, low-dose mercury exposure include fatigue, nausea, hair loss, peripheral neuropathy, cognitive decline, and eventually organ failure. These symptoms overlap significantly with those of several cancers, including pancreatic cancer. Naomi sat in the brownstone for a very long time, holding that receipt. She was not thinking about revenge, not yet. She was thinking about Catherine Ashford, a woman she had never met, sitting in a doctor's office, being told her symptoms were unexplained. A woman whose own husband may have been slowly, methodically introducing a lethal compound into her environment. A woman who tried to leave and never got the chance. And then Naomi thought about the baby growing inside her own body. She was 9 weeks pregnant. She had found out 12 days ago. She had not yet told Richard. She put the documents back in the drawer. She locked it. And she began to plan. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now, because the chess match that is about to begin is unlike anything you have ever heard. October passed. November passed. Naomi told no one what she had found. Not Ethan, not her therapist, not her closest friend, a woman named Denise Walker, who had been her college roommate at Georgetown and was now a federal prosecutor in the District of Columbia. She told no one because she understood something fundamental about the situation, a principle that applies to any conflict where power is asymmetric. When you are facing an opponent who controls the money, the family, the lawyers, the narrative, and the social infrastructure, you do not confront them head-on. You do not give them warning. You do not allow them to activate their defenses. Instead, you gather evidence quietly. You build your case in silence. You let them believe they are in control. And then, when you are ready, and only when you are ready, you strike in a way that leaves no room for recovery. This is not just a storytelling principle. This is how power actually works. In corporate litigation, in intelligence operations, in family court, the person who reveals their hand first almost always loses. The person who waits, who watches, who documents, they are the one who wins. Naomi waited. And while she waited, she worked. She contacted a former colleague at the agency, not through official channels, but through a private encrypted communication protocol they had established years ago. She asked for a discreet analysis of the chemical receipts she had found.
Take this hot tea, my lovely daughter. You and your baby needs it, as the weather is cold.
Within 72 hours, she had confirmation. The supply company in Delaware had indeed sold dimethylmercury to a buyer matching the details on the receipt. The company had since been shut down for regulatory violations, but their records, or at least the records that mattered, still existed in a federal archive. She also began monitoring her own food and beverages with a level of precision that would seem paranoid to anyone who did not know her background. She carried a portable spectrometer, a device roughly the size of a smartphone, that could identify the molecular composition of any liquid within 90 seconds. She tested every glass of water, every cup of tea, every meal prepared in the Ashford household. For 2 months, she found nothing. Richard was not actively poisoning her, not yet. Then, in early December, the invitation came. Richard Ashford was hosting Christmas dinner at the Greenwich estate. It would be a formal affair, 24 guests, a catered meal, a live string quartet. Richard made a point of calling Naomi personally to extend the invitation. "I want this Christmas to be special," he said, his voice warm and measured. "Especially now that we have something wonderful to celebrate." He was referring to the pregnancy. Naomi had told Ethan at 11 weeks, and Ethan, unable to contain himself, had told his father the same day. "I would not miss it," Naomi said. She hung up the phone and immediately began preparing for what she knew was coming, not because she had evidence that Richard planned to poison her at Christmas, but because she understood the psychology of a man like him, and this is crucial to understanding how narcissistic abusers operate. A narcissist does not simply dislike a perceived threat, they need to eliminate it. And they often choose moments of celebration, holidays, weddings, birthdays, to execute their most destructive actions. Why? Because these are the moments when the target's guard is lowest, when everyone is happy, when suspicion is socially unacceptable. A holiday gathering is the perfect cover for cruelty, because the very atmosphere of the event makes it impossible for the victim to react without appearing unstable. Naomi knew this. She had studied it academically and observed it operationally, and she was ready. The Greenwich estate was decorated with the kind of precision that only significant money could produce. Every window held a wreath. Every banister was wrapped in garland. The main dining room, a 40-foot-long space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the frozen lake, had been set with china, crystal, and silver that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Naomi and Ethan arrived on Christmas Eve, one day before the dinner. Richard had insisted they stay overnight in the guest quarters so they could enjoy the full holiday together as a family. Naomi smiled and agreed. She had packed 3 things that no other guest would have brought: the portable spectrometer, a set of sterile collection vials, and a digital recorder small enough to fit inside a lipstick tube. That evening, Richard hosted a small Christmas Eve gathering. Just family, 8 people total. Ethan's cousin Marcus was there with his wife, along with Richard's younger brother Gerald, and Gerald's wife, Patricia. The atmosphere was warm, festive, controlled. Everything orchestrated by Richard with the precision of a man who understood that the appearance of normalcy was itself a weapon. Naomi watched Richard all evening. She watched how he poured drinks. She watched how he moved through the kitchen, casually, as if he were simply checking on the catering staff, but with a spatial awareness that told her he knew exactly where every glass and plate was at all times. At 9:47 p.m., Richard handed Naomi a cup of mulled cider. "Made it myself," he said with a smile. "Old family recipe. Catherine used to love it." The mention of Catherine was deliberate. Naomi knew it immediately. It was a test, a way to see if Naomi would react to the dead wife's name, a way to remind her, subtly, that women in this family were temporary. Naomi accepted the cup. She thanked him. She raised it to her lips, and she smelled it. Not the cinnamon, not the cloves, not the orange peel or the nutmeg. Beneath all of those, faint, almost imperceptible, detectable only by someone who had spent years training their olfactory system to identify chemical signatures in complex solutions, she smelled something metallic, something that did not belong. She did not drink. She smiled at Richard. She set the cup down on a side table, and when no one was looking, she poured a small sample into one of her collection vials and sealed it in her coat pocket. Later that night, alone in the guest bathroom with the door locked and the shower running to mask any sound, she tested the sample. The spectrometer took 83 seconds to return results. The cider contained ethylene glycol, the primary component of antifreeze. In the concentration present in the cup, a full serving would not have killed Naomi immediately, but it would have been enough to cause kidney damage. In a pregnant woman, it could trigger a miscarriage, and because the symptoms, nausea, confusion, rapid heartbeat, would mimic common pregnancy complications, no one would have suspected poisoning unless they specifically tested for it. Naomi stared at the spectrometer screen for a very long time. Then she washed the vial, sealed the data, and went to bed beside her husband. She did not sleep. Christmas morning arrived wrapped in frost and false cheer. Naomi came downstairs at 7:15, dressed in a cream cashmere sweater and a calm expression that betrayed nothing. She kissed Ethan. She accepted a glass of orange juice from the kitchen, testing it discreetly before drinking. It was clean. Richard was already in the dining room, reviewing the seating chart for that evening's dinner. 24 guests, a United States senator, 2 hedge fund managers, a retired federal judge, the kind of guest list designed to make any accusation against the host sound absurd. Naomi understood this too. Surrounding yourself with powerful, reputable people is one of the oldest strategies for manufacturing credibility. If you are sitting at a table with a senator and a judge, how could you possibly be a criminal? The social proof alone makes the accusation seem delusional, but Naomi was not going to make an accusation. Not tonight. Not publicly. That was not the plan. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1. Confirm the threat and secure evidence. Phase 2. Identify the full scope of Richard's crimes, past and present. Phase 3. Deliver consequences so complete that recovery was impossible. She was now at the end of Phase 1. The evidence from the cider was secured on her spectrometer's encrypted storage. She had time-stamped readings. She had the original sample sealed in a vial, and she had 12 years of training that would make her testimony unimpeachable in any courtroom in the country. But she needed more. 1 sample of contaminated cider by itself could be explained away. Richard's lawyers, and he had many, would argue contamination, equipment malfunction, or fabrication. She needed a pattern. She needed him to try again. And she needed witnesses who did not know they were witnessing. So she gave him the opportunity. At breakfast, Naomi made a point of mentioning, casually, in front of the whole family, that she had not been sleeping well lately. "The pregnancy is making me so tired," she said, "and my stomach has been a little off. I think I might need to take it easy today." She watched Richard's face as she said this. And there, just for a fraction of a second, so brief that no one else at the table would have caught it, she saw it. A flicker of satisfaction, a micro-expression of pleasure, quickly suppressed, at the idea that the poison might already be working. But it was not working. She had not consumed any of it. What she had done was provide Richard with a narrative, a cover story he could use. If the pregnant woman was already feeling unwell, then any symptoms that appeared later could be attributed to the pregnancy. She was giving him confidence. She was making him believe his plan was succeeding, and confident people make mistakes. Now stop for a second. If you have made it this far, you are one of the loyal ones. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you do if you were Naomi right now? Would you confront him? Would you leave? Or would you stay and finish the game? Tell me in the comments. And if you have not subscribed yet, this is your sign. Do it now. Because the dinner scene is about to change everything. 24 guests arrived between 5 and 6 p.m. The estate looked like something from a magazine. Candles, crystal, the string quartet playing Vivaldi in the foyer. Richard stood at the entrance greeting every guest by name, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, performing the role of benevolent patriarch with the fluency of a man who had been rehearsing it for decades. Naomi wore a black dress, simple, elegant, chosen deliberately because it had interior pockets large enough to hold 2 collection vials and the spectrometer. The dinner was served in courses: a winter salad, a butternut squash soup, a main course of roasted duck with a cranberry reduction, and for dessert, a pear tart with a ginger-infused cream sauce. Naomi tested everything. The salad was clean, the soup was clean, the duck was clean. The cream sauce, on her specific portion of the pear tart, was not. This time, the compound was different, not ethylene glycol. This time, the spectrometer identified colchicine, a plant-derived alkaloid extracted from autumn crocus. In therapeutic doses, colchicine is used to treat gout. In elevated doses, it causes multi-organ failure. And in a pregnant woman, it is teratogenic, meaning it can cause severe birth defects or terminate the pregnancy entirely. The fact that Richard had switched compounds between Christmas Eve and Christmas Day told Naomi everything she needed to know. This was not impulsive. This was not a single desperate act. This was a methodical research campaign. He had studied the compounds. He knew their effects. He knew their dosages. He had likely been planning this for months, perhaps from the moment he learned about the pregnancy. Naomi did not eat the cream sauce. She sampled it. She sealed the sample. She ate the pear beneath it, and smiled at Richard across the table. "The dessert is wonderful," she said. "Please give my compliments to the chef." Richard raised his glass to her. "Only the best for family," he said. After the dinner, after the guests had gone, after Ethan had fallen asleep in the guest room with Captain curled at his feet, Naomi sat in the dark and made 3 calls. The first was to Denise Walker, her Georgetown roommate, now a federal prosecutor. Naomi spoke for 12 minutes. She outlined what she had found: the documents in the desk, the receipt for dimethylmercury, the contaminated cider, the contaminated cream sauce. She provided compound identifications, concentrations, timestamps, and chain of custody documentation for every sample. Denise was silent for a long time after Naomi finished. Then she said, "You know what this means. If he did what you think he did to Catherine, that is murder, Naomi. Not attempted, completed." "I know," Naomi said. "And what he is doing to you, that is attempted murder against a pregnant woman, in a jurisdiction that will prosecute that as 2 counts. "I know," Naomi said again. Denise told her she would contact the FBI's field office in Connecticut first thing in the morning. She told Naomi to secure all evidence and maintain normal behavior until agents could coordinate a response. The second call was to her former colleague at the agency. She requested a full background pull on Richard Ashford the Second: financial records, corporate filings, offshore accounts, any flag transactions. Within 6 hours, the colleague delivered a preliminary report that revealed something Naomi had suspected but not yet confirmed. Richard had been systematically moving assets out of the Ashford family trust for over 15 years, routing money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Singapore. The total amount diverted was approximately $470 million. This was money that legally belonged to the trust, money that Ethan, as the sole beneficiary after Catherine's death, was entitled to. Richard had been stealing from his own son for a decade and a half. Here is an educational point that most people never learn until it is too late, and it concerns generational wealth and estate manipulation. When a family trust is established, the assets within it are supposed to be managed for the benefit of the named beneficiaries, not the trustee. But when the trustee is also the patriarch of the family, and when the beneficiaries trust him implicitly, the opportunity for self-dealing is enormous. The trustee can create shell companies, route management fees to entities they control, undervalue assets during distributions, and siphon millions before anyone notices. This is not theoretical. It happens in wealthy families, constantly. And the victims, usually the children or grandchildren, often do not discover the theft until the trustee dies and the estate is finally audited. Richard had been counting on that timeline. He assumed Ethan would never look. He assumed no one would ever audit the trust while he was alive. And he assumed that any woman who entered Ethan's life would be too intimidated, too unsophisticated, or too dependent to ask the right questions. He had not counted on Naomi. The third call was the hardest. She called Ethan's cousin Marcus. She had observed Marcus carefully over the past year, watching how he interacted with Richard, listening to the things he said and the things he carefully did not say. Marcus was 43, a quiet man who worked in nonprofit management and had always existed at the margins of the Ashford family. He was not wealthy by Ashford standards. He was not powerful, but he was observant. And during a conversation 6 months earlier, he had said something that stayed with Naomi. They had been discussing Catherine's death, casually in the way families discuss old grief, and Marcus had said, "Aunt Catherine was the strongest person I ever knew. I never understood how she got sick so fast. It never made sense to me." It never made sense to him. Naomi called Marcus at 1:15 a.m. on December 26th. She told him what she had found. She told him about the documents, the dimethylmercury receipt, the poisoned cider and cream sauce. She told him what she believed had happened to Catherine. Marcus was silent for 45 seconds. When he spoke, his voice was shaking. But what he said was not what Naomi expected. "I have something you need to see," he said. "I have had it for years. I did not know what it meant until now." Marcus had a journal, Catherine's journal. She had given it to him 3 weeks before her diagnosis, asked him to keep it safe, told him not to read it unless something happened to her. He had kept it in a safety deposit box for over 20 years, honoring her request. He had never opened it. Until now. Catherine Ashford's journal was 97 pages long, written in small, precise handwriting. Marcus drove it to the Greenwich estate and handed it to Naomi in the parking area at 3 a.m. While the house slept, Naomi read it in the guest room by the light of her phone while Ethan breathed softly beside her. Catherine had documented everything. She described the gradual onset of her symptoms, the fatigue, the nausea, the hair loss. She described how Richard dismissed her concerns, told her she was stressed, suggested she was being dramatic. She described finding a small vial of clear liquid in his study, a vial she did not recognize and could not identify. She described how her symptoms worsened after meals Richard prepared personally and improved when she traveled alone. She wrote about her decision to hire a divorce attorney. She wrote about her fear. And in the final entry, dated 11 days before her cancer diagnosis, she wrote a single line that would later be read aloud in a federal courtroom. "If something happens to me, look at Richard. He is not who anyone thinks he is." Naomi closed the journal. She pressed her hand to her stomach, to the baby that was still growing, still safe, still untouched by the poison meant for it. And she made a decision. She was not going to wait for the FBI. She was not going to let this unfold on someone else's timeline. She was going to give Richard Ashford exactly enough rope to hang himself, and then she was going to pull it tight. January 2nd, Naomi invited Richard to lunch at a restaurant in Manhattan, an upscale Italian place in Midtown that she chose for two specific reasons. First, it was public. Second, it had excellent security camera coverage, which she had confirmed in advance by visiting the restaurant and speaking with the manager under the pretense of planning a private event. Richard arrived in a charcoal suit, looking every bit the distinguished patriarch. He kissed Naomi on the cheek. He asked about the baby. He ordered a bottle of wine, for himself only, since she was pregnant. Naomi let 30 minutes pass. She let him relax. She let him perform. And then, with the precision of someone who had conducted hundreds of intelligence debriefings, she began, "Richard, I have been thinking about Catherine lately." His expression did not change. "Oh? What brought that on?" "Ethan has been talking about her more. I think the baby is making him reflective. He said something interesting the other day, that Catherine's illness never made sense to him, that she was so healthy, and then suddenly she was not." Richard took a sip of wine. "Cancer is unpredictable. It does not discriminate." "That is true," Naomi said, "but I looked into it a little, just out of curiosity, as a scientist, and I found something strange."
"Please, Naomi, forgive me. Don't let them take me."
The symptoms Catherine experienced before her diagnosis, the fatigue, the hair loss, the neuropathy,
They are not typical of pancreatic cancer.
they are typical of heavy metal toxicity. She paused. She watched his hands. The left one, the one holding the wine glass, tightened almost imperceptibly. "I am sure it is nothing," she continued. "But, as someone who works in toxicology, I could not help noticing the overlap. Funny how the mind works." Richard set down his glass. His eyes, for the first time since Naomi had known him, were not warm. They were calculating, recalibrating. "You have an interesting imagination, Naomi," he said. "But I would be careful about where it takes you." "Oh, I am always careful," she said. "It is one of my best qualities." She excused herself. After the meal, she walked 3 blocks to a waiting car, and she played back the recording she had captured on the device in her pocket, a conversation in which Richard Ashford the Second, upon being told that his late wife's symptoms matched heavy metal poisoning, did not express shock, did not express grief, did not express curiosity. He expressed a threat. That recording, along with the spectrometer data, the chemical samples, Catherine's journal, the financial audit, and the testimony of 4 expert witnesses, would form the core of the federal case against Richard Ashford. Hit that subscribe button if you have not already, because the ending of this story is one you will want to tell people about. The FBI arrested Richard Ashford II on January 19th at 7:45 a.m. at the Greenwich estate. He was charged with 1 count of first-degree murder in the death of Catherine Ashford, 2 counts of attempted murder against Naomi Carter Ashford and her unborn child, 17 counts of wire fraud, 12 counts of money laundering, and 3 counts of tax evasion. The arrest was not quiet. Federal agents arrived in 6 vehicles, The estate gates were breached with a warrant signed by a federal magistrate judge. Richard was handcuffed in his study, the same study where, decades earlier, he had hidden the evidence of his crimes in a desk drawer and assumed no one would ever find it. Ethan learned the full truth that morning. Naomi told him everything: the documents, the poisoning, the financial theft, Catherine's journal. She told him in their living room, with the door closed and Captain lying between them, and she watched her husband's face move through every stage of grief in the space of 30 minutes. He did not speak for a long time. When he finally did, he asked only one question: "Did he kill my mother?" "Yes," Naomi said. "I believe he did, and the evidence supports it." Ethan broke, not loudly, not dramatically. He broke the way strong structures break, from the inside, silently, with hairline fractures that spread until the whole foundation gives way. He put his head in his hands, and he wept for the mother he had lost, and the father he had never truly known. Naomi held him. She did not tell him it would be okay. She did not offer false comfort. She held him and let him feel the full weight of it, because she understood that healing does not begin with reassurance. It begins with truth. The trial lasted 14 weeks. The prosecution presented over 1,200 pieces of evidence. The spectrometer data was analyzed by 3 independent laboratories, all of which confirmed the presence of ethylene glycol and colchicine in the samples Naomi had collected. Catherine's journal was authenticated by forensic document examiners. The financial records revealed the full scope of Richard's embezzlement: $473 million diverted through 26 shell companies across 7 countries. Richard's defense team, a squad of 7 attorneys from one of the most expensive law firms in New York, attempted every strategy available to them. They challenged the chain of custody. They questioned Naomi's credentials. They argued that Catherine's journal was hearsay. Every argument failed. Naomi testified for 2 days. She explained the toxicology in language that the jury could understand. She walked them through the spectrometer readings. She described the smell of the mulled cider, the metallic note beneath the cinnamon that no untrained person would have detected. And she explained, with clinical precision, exactly how dimethylmercury could be administered over months to simulate the onset of cancer in an otherwise healthy woman. When the defense attorney asked her how she could be so certain of her analysis, Naomi looked at the jury and said, "Because I spent 11 years ensuring that the people who protect this country were not killed by exactly these methods. I have tested over 6,000 samples in my career. My error rate is 0. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 47 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Richard Ashford the Second was sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. His assets were frozen. The shell companies were dissolved. The stolen funds were returned to the Ashford Family Trust, which Ethan, as sole beneficiary, now controlled entirely. Richard's social world collapsed overnight. The senator who had attended Christmas dinner issued a public statement distancing himself from the family. The hedge fund managers severed all business ties. The retired judge, who had known Richard for 30 years, told a reporter that he felt sick to have ever sat at that table. There was no redemption arc. There was no tearful reconciliation. There was no moment where Richard showed remorse or humanity or regret. In his final statement, before sentencing, he looked at Ethan, not at Naomi, not at the judge, not at the gallery, and said, "Everything I did for this family." Ethan did not respond. He held Naomi's hand, and he did not look back. 6 months after the trial, Naomi gave birth to a daughter. They named her Catherine. She weighed 7 pounds and 4 ounces. She had her father's eyes and her mother's composure. Even at 3 days old, she had a way of looking at the world that suggested she was already taking notes. Ethan restructured the Ashford Family Trust. He dissolved the defense contracting arm of the business, the division that had been the foundation of Richard's empire, and redirected the funds into a philanthropic foundation focused on 3 areas: domestic violence support, financial literacy education, and toxicology research. Naomi returned to consulting, but on her own terms. She founded a private firm that provided toxicology analysis for domestic abuse cases, working with prosecutors across the country to identify cases where poisoning had been disguised as natural illness. In her first 2 years, Her firm contributed to the successful prosecution of 11 cases. 11 families who, like the Ashfords, had been living with a predator, hiding in plain sight. Marcus Ashford became the foundation's first executive director. He carried Catherine's journal with him for years, not as evidence, but as a reminder. A reminder that silence, even well-intentioned silence, can become complicity. That keeping someone's secret is not always the same as keeping them safe. And Denise Walker, the Georgetown roommate, the federal prosecutor, was promoted to the Department of Justice's Criminal Division, where she led a new task force on financial crimes within family trusts. The task force was informally known around the office as the Ashford Unit. As for Naomi, she never spoke publicly about the case. She never gave interviews. She never wrote a book. When reporters asked her how she had known, how she had detected what no one else could, she gave the same answer every time. I was trained to notice what people try to hide, that is all. But that was not all, and she knew it. What saved Naomi Carter Ashford was not just her training. It was not just her intelligence, or her courage, or her 11 years in the most secretive division of the CIA. What saved her was something much simpler and much harder to teach. She paid attention. In a world that rewards speed and spectacle, she moved slowly and watched carefully. In a family that demanded conformity, she remained herself. In a house built on secrets, she opened every locked drawer, and when a powerful man handed her a cup of poison and smiled, she smiled back. And then she burned his kingdom to the ground. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done differently? And if you want to see part 2 of this story, where we go deeper into the trial and the aftermath, let me know below. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and never underestimate the woman sitting quietly at the table.